not that she wasn't thriving before, but we felt like she was thriving. But it was because like we started to really shift our perspective on things.
Mhm.
And it wasn't Bayley that was needing to change, like we had to change.
Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is There Are No Tangents.
Feels like I seen this all in a dream. What's the purpose of a human being? Never mind me. I'm just lost in my thoughts. What's the topic? Ain't no topic. Keep it going, no, don't stop it. Don't get the picture, then we grab it. With no emotion, what's the line? We just lost in our thoughts. Not on the surface, beyond that. Pull back the curtains, I'm on that. Once we take it there, ain't no going back. Don't be losing the topic, man. We gotta stay on track. Yeah, you so crazy, yeah, I know it. Tell me a story, like a poet. Yeah, like a poet. We getting lost in our thoughts. Welcome to the show. Emma and Lisa, they already on the roll. Are you ready?
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of There Are No Tangents. We're really happy to be with you, and we have a very special guest on with us today for our series of Shifting Gears. We've really been enjoying this series of Shifting Gears. It's been so cool to learn from other people and just for us, Lisa and I, to be able to talk about some of the things where we've shifted in transition. Transition seems to be a really big thing at play for a lot of people, especially, during the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic and those sorts of things. And so we're very excited to welcome our friend Tiffany to the podcast today. And so Tiffany and I met, when was that? 2020? Or was it 2019? I got my dates straight.
Sure. It was, I don't know. I can't remember when
I can't either.
The group was created, but
yeah, I want to say it might have been, oh gosh, I don't know, 2020 or 2019, y'all.
yeah.
And so we've known each other for a few years at this point, and we actually met online on a Facebook group, which is so funny. And I know you have a lot of close personal friends from that group. You are very good about staying in touch with people and connecting with people. I suck a little bit more in that regard, but I did make it a point to stay connected to you. And I've just really enjoyed getting to know you as a person and all of the different things. And I know that you have a really incredible journey with a lot of different things that we'll kind of get into. But before I introduce that and the topic that we'll kind of be getting into today, I wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to say about yourself in terms of just introing who you are a little bit. What about you?
Yeah. Well, currently right now, I am a stay-at-home mom, work from home mom. And I also have a job outside of the home where I substitute teach.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were talking about like transitions, and especially during COVID, that made me start to think about like my own personal journey with transitioning, not only as a mom, but also as just like Tiffany.
Yeah.
And during COVID, it was a nice, and I don't say this to like take away or make light of COVID, but it really forced my family and also myself to slow down. Like everything shut down. We stayed at home, and that was a bit of a double-edged sword because it was nice to have the time and the opportunity to kind of like work through things and process things, but it was a little difficult too. So I'm grateful that we had that journey, because I don't think that our family unit or myself would be, where we're at today without that time, being frozen.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing perspective. I think probably Lisa and I would feel similarly based on some of our conversations we've had. Because of course it wasn't like a quote unquote good thing, COVID, but it really did help us to reorient to things and reprioritize things in a different way. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And so, well, I know for you, one thing that we were really excited for you to be able to share a little bit about is you have a lot of firsthand experience as it relates to the topic of neurodivergence and autism. So those are some of the things that we will be chatting about today, as well as I'm sure we'll do some tangents and talk about, as we always do, some other transitions. And you've had a lot of, even just job transitions, and I'm sure a lot of stuff will come up. But yes, I was specifically pertaining to, your daughter and kind of navigating that journey with autism and all of those sorts of things. And you have been instrumental in helping me understand more about autism spectrum. And so I still feel like, and I'm sure Lisa feels similarly, because we've chatted a little bit about this, but we have so much to learn as a society, but also Lisa and I. And so we are really grateful that you're here. And so I'll say up front, and for the sake of our listeners, like, if you have anybody in your life, with autism, or maybe you don't, even better to listen in to this episode, because I know that Tiffany's going to be able to impart a lot of wisdom to us today. And I've already told Tiffany before we hit record, but like if Lisa or if we like phrase something the wrong way or whatever, and you're like, actually, I would kind of phrase it this way, because like I say, even in terms of like the language that we use to describe this, it's always evolving and always shifting. So anyway, really grateful that you're on to be able to talk about some of these really important topics today. So yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'll turn it over to you for a little bit, and we'll probably pop in with some questions and things here or there, but take it away.
Okay. Well, so before I started to like stay at home, in pre-COVID, I worked in public education, in special education. And a lot of the students that I worked with, they had, more significant disabilities, as far as like complex communication needs, complex behaviors. You'll see me do this a lot. Oh, if you're not watching,
Yeah.
It's also like a podcast. Sorry.
Yeah, she's doing the air quotes. Yeah.
There's just some words, and like you touched on, just language and how we, speak about people is super important. But for people who are not familiar with special education or neurodiversity, sometimes I use words that I don't love, but just to kind of help bridge that gap with understanding. So a lot of the kids that I worked with, unfortunately, teachers didn't always love them just because of not knowing how to connect and relate. But I loved my job so much, and I had great teammates, and it was awesome. I worked for about 7 years, and during that time I had 2 kids. And after I had my daughter, there was like a huge internal shift. I wanted to stay home. Like I didn't want to go back to work. And through that, I learned that like, because my brain and body could not handle all of like the mental work of, doing a great job at my job, but then also doing a great job as a mom, and a wife. It was just.
And I'll say real quick,
hard.
So you said after your daughter, so your daughter is your youngest. So you do have, yes. Okay.
Yes.
So just to set that scene, so you already were working when Jack was little, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I did the whole entire,
can I say their names? Is that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. Yes, I did the whole entire, like getting up at like 5 a.m. to get him to childcare, to get to my job. Like I did that for a couple of years, and it was great. I loved it. I was managing it, but something about like just having Bayley, I don't know if it's just adding that second life that you're having to take care of. I was not realizing, but like my brain and body started to shut down. And just to kind of jump to ahead in the future, it was because I had ADHD. I've always had ADHD, but it was, undiagnosed. And what I've learned is that a lot of individuals, especially women, they hit a time in their life where sometimes it can present as like depression or anxiety, but it's really because they have ADHD. So whatever coping skills and masking they have done their whole entire life, they're not able to do it anymore. And so that's kind of what happened with me during 2018, 2019. That was that internal shift. My body was like, okay, this is not very helpful.
Yeah.
So, and so 2019, Bayley was born January 12th. So her birthday is next week. She'll be 4.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I know. I love Facebook memory pop-ups, because you're like, oh, they're so teeny, but then you're crying like 10 minutes later,
Yes. Yeah. That's usually
Um,
the only reason I post to Facebook is so I can have the memories.
yes.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that first year of being home from, 2019 to 2020, it was a dream. I had started up a part-time e-commerce business.
Mhm.
I don't know. I was just so excited that I was able to stay at home, bring in a little money.
Mhm.
And, during that time period of her first year, she did have some like delays and I was trying to like navigate that because of my experience in special education. And I didn't want to be like hypersensitive or like hyper focused on things. But some of her delays, like didn't go away or they got worse as far as her like being late to like roll over and not being able to hold up her head. And she wasn't into taking solids. Like my son Jack was very much, by the book per se, as far as milestones. And he still fell into a normal, I'm doing air quotes again, normal, developmental milestone range, like early with some things, but a little late, nothing concerning. But hers, it was just like one more thing. She had a really hard time eating, gaining weight. And I just was like, this is very different. Like, I just kind of kept having this nagging feeling of, and nagging's a negative word, but it just didn't go away from me. Like, she's different. But so many people kept telling me, oh, she's fine. She's good. She's such a smiley baby. And when she hit about 6 months, some of the sleep issues got a little bit better. Some of the crying issues and eating issues got a little bit better, but she was just so different. Like, she always wanted to be held all the time. And so I couldn't put her down, or she would, get very upset, let her cry it out for a little bit. She'll figure it out, as she got older. It was never like that for her. And around her first birthday, it was actually on her birthday, we were celebrating and eating cake, and we had the window open because it was like a random, very hot and warm day in January.
Yeah.
And our neighbor was outside mowing the lawn, and she kept looking outside the window and the door. And we couldn't get her attention at all. Like, we couldn't get her to break away from, staring at our neighbor. And we kept calling her name. And, even my husband was like, what's going on? Like, and so as we discussed it that night, we started to realize like, oh, well, she was saying these words, but now she's not. And we started to go through some videos that we had of her. And we realized like her eye contact wasn't great. She wasn't bringing stuff to us. And so then I get on Google and I'm like, trying to
as we do.
Yes, right.
When anything's concerning with our kids, we're like,
yes, all of these like 12-month milestones. And so many of them she wasn't at. And it just hit me. I'm like, I think she's autistic. Like, There's just so much with the communication and her sensory things. It just, and it didn't like upset me. I know I've spoken to some other people where their journeys have been a little bit different. I wasn't upset. I was just more so like, why? Like, just trying to fit in these little pieces to make sense of it, I guess. Because, you know, the professionals in my life, they were telling me like everything's okay. But as her mom, I just felt like, I'm not sure. So then COVID 2020 hit. So I don't even know if I'm answering any questions or I'm
doing
sorry
amazing.
if I'm like rambling.
No. You're doing perfectly fine. I have like questions popping up, but I can tell that you're going to get to it. And so you're absolutely painting the picture and
interrupt me or like wave at me to get
totally. Well,
No, it's great.
So 2020 COVID hit, the world shut down. And by that point, you know, she was like 14 months old and our pediatrician was like, okay, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, yeah, because I had made an appointment like a week after her birthday for her wellness, you know, 1-year checkup, but really to talk to him about these things. And at that appointment, he was like, yeah, something's a little, you know, different. And getting Bayley services and COVID, it was so difficult. And I think that's something that, you know, individuals who are not part of, you know, the disabled community, or they're not like a caretaker, they don't fully understand the impact that it had on the disabled community.
And I will ask a question right here, if that's okay. I know you and I had pre-chatted a little bit before, and this is another language thing. So hearing you say disabled community, is that appropriate to say? Because it wasn't until you just shared that with me in our Voxer that I didn't realize that. So for people listening, is that how it would be described?
Yeah, for the most part. So there's a big shift in the community, whether it's like educational, professional, there's a shift happening of pro-neurodiversity language. So neurodiversity is the understanding, philosophy, acceptance that different brains, all brains are okay, but brains that, you know, deviate a little bit from the norm. It's just part of like the natural variation of brains. It's just how, you know, some people's brains are made, and it's okay. So there's the pro-neurodiversity movement that's happening. And a lot of that is because of COVID. I think a lot of individuals found a platform like through social media where they could start putting out their thoughts and feelings as a disabled individual versus maybe their mom or a family member doing it.
Right.
And so, yeah, like saying disabled is okay. Saying autistic is okay, because having a disability, it impacts you so much. And especially I'll speak to like autism and ADHD because that's what I'm a little bit more familiar with.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it is your brain. It's how your brain is. And so it is a part of you. It is your identity. And so there used to be like you would say, like child with autism, because autism doesn't define them. There's so much more than that.
Sure.
But, you know, hearing from individuals, they're like, no, like, this is who I am. It is a part of me. And so there's a big switch. I always like to say, like, if you do have someone in your life who is disabled, you know, finding out from them how they would like to be referred to as is a big thing, because there are some adults who prefer to say like, I have autism. And that's something like, you would respect, but for the most part, like disabled, autistic, all of those things are completely okay. Because the more that we get used to saying those words and understanding that it's okay, hopefully there will be more acceptance of differences over time.
Yeah. And would you say, and again, this is me asking out of pure ignorance, which, whatever. But would you say it's the same thing as it pertains to ADHD? Like, is that a little bit different?
And that's something I'm still personally like learning and trying to figure out. Because some of it is like how it sounds. It sounds weird to say like ADHD individual. And I have been seeing online how, I don't want to say it should be worded, but I personally feel like saying person with ADHD, and what I have seen, that's what I have been seeing like in different Facebook groups. There's a reason for it. I'm not quite sure why. So, because same thing with like Down syndrome. That's another like language thing where, some people would want to say like, oh, that Downs kid, which is totally inappropriate to say.
Right.
But it also doesn't sound right to say like Down syndrome, that Down syndrome kid. So some of it is semantics. Some of it I'm still like on that journey myself figuring out.
Sure.
But definitely like autistic individual, disabled individual, those things are okay to say, and, just accepting that it's not a bad word.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's important. But yeah, I cut you off. I think when you were talking about, you were meeting with the pediatrician when she was around 14 months.
Yeah. So we got in lots of referrals, for early intervention, but early intervention, where I'm at was like shut down. They were only doing like referrals and evaluations through Zoom, which would not work for, any 14-month-old. But especially for my little girl, because some of her differences were very subtle. And you can't even, not so much now, but from far away, she may look a certain way, but like you have to get in the nitty gritty with her, especially when she was younger, to kind of pick up on some of her differences. So it took a while to get in to be seen. We were super blessed because all of the therapists that she got were just so amazing. Bayley connected with them early on. And those individuals had like huge impacts on her overall development. And so we're very thankful and very blessed, because through other families that I've spoken to, like early intervention, especially during COVID, they did not have the same experience. So somehow the stars aligned for us. And that's something that we will, I feel like we will always be in debt to our little early intervention team, because they're incredible.
So I do kind of have another question as it relates to that. Again, this is me not knowing much at all, about autism, but I remember speaking to somebody at one point and they were saying like, how old do you have to be to receive like an official diagnosis, if you will? Because it sounds like, like you said, Bayley was really fortunate to be able to have that early intervention. Is that typical? Like, it sounds like it's not compared, like as you've kind of just shared in like speaking with other people, but like across the board, like, will people do that? Like, does that make sense what I'm trying to ask? I have a question and it's like kind of hard to pinpoint the exact question, but
So, autism, so this is another shift in movement. So autism spectrum disorder, you may hear that a lot. Not the best thing to say because disorder, unfortunately, has like a negative impact. It's not a disease or anything. And so like when you think about autism and you hear the word spectrum, I think a lot of people think it's linear. So you may have like an extreme on this side, an extreme on that side, and then the kids kind of flow here and there. Mm-hmm. But in reality, it's, and I don't know what it's called, but in reality, it's like a mic system, like, at concerts and stuff, how there are these little buttons that move like up and down for like different mics and like audio and stuff.
Yes.
That's really what autism is like. So if each button may be like communication, sensory, fine motor, gross motor, for each kid, that button's going to be moved up and down. Yeah. So it's really not a linear type of thing. Okay. And I would say that there's also a very small start of change as far as like assessments with, diagnosing autism. A lot of it has a strong bias towards boys. A lot of the research about autism, especially in young children, it's only about boys. And so that's why the statistics for boys are supposedly higher. But in reality, there are many girls who have autism because they mask their whole entire life. They learn how to cope, or, they may play more so with baby dolls than trains and spinning the wheels. So there's this misconception that symptoms look different in girls, but that's really not the case. That just stems from like the bias and the research and the assessments and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So because there is bias, there's misunderstanding that definitely plays a huge impact on diagnosing autism. A lot of pediatricians are not, they don't have like a full grasp because they're a pediatrician. So they're going to send out referrals to people. Sure. So, misses are going to happen. And because those little like mic buttons get moved up and down, autism is typically, most people don't like to diagnose until 3 is very young still for average. 5 is like, okay, I'll say, they're autistic. Mm-hmm. But there's a small shift. They're starting to pivot of diagnosing earlier. Mm-hmm. Because early intervention is so important, not to change the child. It's more so for families to learn how to better support their children and their needs specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I was thinking, like, as you were sharing your story and your personal experience, like you said, it just sounded like that wasn't the norm, right? That wasn't what typically happens. And, so yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Is that because you all, I don't know, just had such a great network of doctors, do you think? Or is it because of the certain knobs on the volume that were displaying for Bayley? Or like what was contributing to that, do you think?
I think probably a little bit of some of the things that you mentioned. So like I said, we had a great network of professional support who were very knowledgeable about child development. I wouldn't necessarily say about autism, but and through that, they were able to really support us as a family, learning how to make small changes in our home and stuff.
Yeah.
Which better supports Bayley, and meets her needs. I would also say some of that is because I love psychology, development, the brain. Like I've always had an interest in that. And I tend to hyper focus on things too, because I have ADHD. So, like when I would hear something new, and not necessarily specifically related to autism, but just this term neurodiversity. I was starting to hear it and see it online. I was like, oh, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
Or if, a therapist mentioned a treatment or like a case study, I'd be like, oh, can you send that to me? I love to learn.
Yeah.
And also too, just my experience in special education, I think definitely played an impact. And just, again, I worked with an incredible group of teachers. I got to experience working with amazing families who really advocated for their children. And so even though there was still struggles and it was demanding and challenging, I just feel like we were very fortunate to have different types of support networks to kind of meet our needs and stuff. So
that's awesome. That's great. And then so at that point, so after she had received that support, what was the next kind of shift that you would say? Like what happened at that point, whether it was in your life or in hers or both or?
Yeah. So Bayley wasn't diagnosed with autism until after her second birthday. So she was like 2 and maybe almost 2.5. Mm-hmm. And before then, she just had the diagnosis of a developmental delay. We had seen like a developmental pediatrician, and that doctor was like, I'm not sure. Let's give it another year. Again, looking back on that, that's probably from, their own bias. They went to school, they went to medical school a long time ago.
Yeah.
And again, it just didn't like sit with me. I was like, it's not a developmental delay. Like there's just some key indicators of some milestones that she missed. And so we were fortunate enough through her early intervention, we got a referral to an amazing psychologist. She felt very confident working with young girls, and really like just kind of picking it apart, like her communication delays. Is it really a true developmental delay, or are there some, is it autism? And so she got that diagnosis. And once she received the diagnosis, it was very weird because I thought there would be this like huge change and shift with her. But there really wasn't. Her services stayed the same. She was the same. But with that diagnosis, we did get more opportunities to different types of services, resources. So it's important that people are trained and educated in autism to properly diagnose, because it does open up some doors for families and children. And a couple months later, so we're in like summer of 2021, we met this amazing speech therapist. I'm going to like shout her out.
Okay, go for it.
And she was like, oh, I'll listen to it. But her name is Adrienne Shortridge. She is like an angel on earth. She is so incredible with what she does. She's great with families, but she's just very educated. And
you want to say like where she's located? Like, do you want to do the full shout out?
Yeah. Well, she lives in Western North Carolina. So she lives like kind of close to me. Okay. And she was like what Bayley needed as far as helping Bayley communicate. Because that's where our biggest struggle was at that point, was communication. And Adrienne's just amazing. She's very knowledgeable. And so it was like once, because Bayley was still in early intervention, there was just a change of therapist. And at that point, I was like, oh my gracious, like this is amazing. Bayley slowly, not that she wasn't thriving before, but we felt like she was thriving. But it was because like we started to really shift our perspective on things. And it wasn't Bayley that was needing the change, like we had to change. And around that time is when I started to think, what is wrong with me? Because a lot of the things that Bayley struggled with, I started to realize like, oh, I also struggle with this. I had some moments where like my brain and body would shut down, some sensory things, hyper focus, and so once I kind of got her settled, I was like, okay, I need to see what's going on with me. Like, am I autistic? Do I just have depression? Like, I just really started to try to figure out what's happening. And that's when I dove deep into neurodiversity and just learning more about like the differences in brains and stuff. And I went to my doctor and I was like, I think I have ADHD. Just communication, disorganization. Like, as a kid, I was always messy. My room was always messy. My car still to this day is messy. Like I have to clean it out like every Sunday because during the week, I just, I have a messy car, and I always link those things to like my morality. Like, oh, I'm lazy. I'm not a good person.
Oh my gosh. You are literally speaking my language. I'm like, oh my God. I've been working on that myself, not like, yes, putting a moral value on things like that, or saying, yes, my therapist has, like, she's like, you keep saying, oh, I was just being lazy. I want you to know you're not lazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, I was saying that. Okay. So anyway, I'm like, well, this is ringing some bells, but, anyway, okay, continue on. But
that was just such a new concept to me. I was like, oh, it's not because I'm a bad person. My brain is wired differently. And so slowly over time, learning, how to put systems into place, routines, really learning skills. Just like we had to learn skills to support Bayley, I had to start learning skills on how to support myself. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to me because, so when, I guess it was probably like 4 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago, something like that. I had just like a routine checkup, just like a wellness check, whatever. And at the time I was really concerned because I was like, I'm just having such a hard time, like with my kids, like I just can't focus on blah, blah, blah. I went through this whole thing and my doctor said, I think you have OCD. So here is a prescription, but you also need to see a therapist. I was like, okay, I'm not going to take the meds, but I will see the therapist. And at our first appointment, we were chatting and she said, you don't have any history of ADHD? I said, no, I was an excellent student, like all these things. She was like, well, I was a great student, but I have severe ADHD. I was like, okay, well, whatever, skip. And then she revisited it several sessions later. And she's like, definitely no ADHD. And I said, definitely. She said, well, we were going to do this assessment. And so we did this assessment. It was like every single thing was yes, except for, can you sit still in meetings? I was like, of course I can sit still in meetings. I might have to doodle or whatever.
Right.
But I can sit still. I don't have to get up and walk around. And so she referred me to like a psychologist. And anyway, that gets into a whole other story. So I never had an actual diagnosis or the actual like psychology appointment. Then I go to a different therapist and she's like, well, I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure that you actually have ADHD. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, HSP, yes, but it's very interesting. From my limited knowledge, there seem to be a lot of overlaps. And I don't know if you would say the same, but between so autism, ADHD, highly sensitive, there seem to be these common traits. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, that is neurodiversity. I mean, it's just a variation of the brain. And so that's why a lot of things do overlap, is because the brain is, each one's wired differently, but there are these, similar traits. And I don't know how like a highly sensitive person relates to neurodiversity. But I feel like it would some way fit in, or it's a variation of the brain, because I thought I also was a highly sensitive person. But when I was working with my doctor, and he was kind of starting to peel the layers from the onion back, I've pretty much masked my whole entire life. But I was messy, procrastinator, like to the point where, early on in my like college years, I was failing classes because I waited for so long, or I was very disorganized. So yeah, like I think it all does relate because of, the brain being wired differently, and just the variation. So, and that's why it's difficult too for young kids to get a diagnosis, because you'll have doctors say, well, let's wait, which is good and bad, because I mean, you definitely want the proper diagnosis, so there's the correct like treatments and resources. But at the same time, a lot of kids aren't going to outgrow things. Like that's just who they are. That's how their brain is. So
yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Lisa, because I actually, when you said that, I was like, oh, I wish I had screenshotted this, because now I'm going to totally butcher it. It wasn't until recently, because I also identify as HSP and was kind of, assessed by a therapist as well. And that was kind of, she was like, well, you read about this is kind of what it's showing or whatever. It was just recently I was reading something, and it was probably on Instagram. I don't totally remember, but it was actually saying like, it was more like from the autistic community, like stop saying you are an HSP, like, because that's taking away from something. I didn't look into it that much. It was like a quick thing, and I kind of tucked it away in my brain, and I thought I need to look into that more later. What is that referring to? So when you brought that up, I was like, oh, I'm so glad, because I didn't know if you come across anything like that. And that was the first time I'd ever seen anybody say that. So I don't know that that's like held by every autistic person or whatever.
yeah.
Or educator or what have you. But I was really curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So. And like, it's just really interesting, because I have seen something like that before. And this is just like what I think. I don't know, but just like my perspective, I wonder if some of that is because the word autistic, or if someone thinks like, there's still a lot of negativity around that label and diagnosis. And so maybe that was kind of stemming from, this term highly sensitive person is more accepted in the world versus autistic. And not saying that, HSP isn't a thing, or, if you say you are HSP, no, you're really autistic. I don't think it's that, but I wonder if it's, it may take away from the autistic community as far as like true acceptance.
That makes a lot of sense. But it's because like one of the very common things for highly sensitive people is like sensory issues, for example, and that's something that at least I've heard a lot about with autism. Just an example. So, it's really interesting to think about that intersection and like what is there that we don't know yet that research will uncover,
Totally.
So then at that point, when you worked with the therapist, you hadn't been officially diagnosed with ADHD, Tiffany, or?
No. So, and this is another interesting thing, through insurance, doctor's offices, however a doctor is trained, sometimes you can get a diagnosis of ADHD from a pediatrician from a regular doctor, but then sometimes you have to be referred out to a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So my doctor felt pretty confident that I had ADHD, but he referred me out to a therapist. And, through working with her, we confirmed I had ADHD,
Okay.
So that looks different, which again, it goes back to making things difficult for individuals who are needing support because, my process was super smooth, but I have a friend who it took her a very long time, one, for someone to take her seriously, but two, to get the diagnosis, to get the medication, to help support her. So.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think about like how far we've come, but like still how much further we need to go. So that's really fascinating. So after you finally realized that and got the support and everything that you needed, did you see changes in your life, or what kind of shifts did you see at that point?
So I started off with medication because when I am not taking medicine, I have more ups and downs. It's not that I can't manage, but like I'm not as consistent with things. So I remember like taking my first pill and a couple hours later, being able to get the dishes done, take care of my dog, do the laundry. Like I was doing all of these things all before like pickup, also while taking care of Bayley. And it was so amazing. I was on this high. And then like the next couple of days, I started to come down from it because I was like, this is what other people's brains are like. Their brain's not like a yarn, like a ball of yarn. They have like individual strings, like it's not all tangled up. And so, I was just, I saw, the shift and the improvement, but like, I almost kind of mourned the years of time that I felt like I was a failure. And so, and I was still doing therapy during that time because for most people, you can't, the pill doesn't teach the skill, basically, so the pill does help out your brain, but, a common characteristic of ADHD is because you do have ups and downs. So you may have a couple of weeks where you're like moving and grooving and then your brain shuts down. And so it's good to have those skills in place to kind of like, supplement the days. Even when you take the pill, it's like, come on, what's going on? It's not it. Again, a lot of this is my experience.
Oh yeah. That's totally, that's exactly what we're looking for. Yeah.
But so, I just taking the medication while going through therapy. Also learning a lot on TikTok.
I've heard that from multiple people. Like, so that's really fascinating.
Yes. I mean, just learning, understanding. I think her name is it Casey Davis?
Okay.
She's like really big into like household management and like neurodiversity and ADHD.
Okay.
And like, that's where I heard from her about not linking it to your morality.
Okay.
All through TikTok. And then I'm like, oh, what are these other things I can learn, from TikTok about, like putting a bowl on our entryway table so I can put my keys like right there. My brain doesn't get that. Like it doesn't register, just having more systems and routines in place. And I had to learn those things, at 30, I think I was like 34 maybe when I got my diagnosis. So I learned a lot from TikTok. I still learn a lot from TikTok.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
That's exactly when I was seeing the therapist who said, I really think you have ADHD. She described for herself having to have a lot of systems, particularly organization systems in place to just keep her life together, basically. But as you're talking about that, of course, like I'm relating it to my experience and my questions about it, like I have those systems. I've had those systems forever. But is that because I'm naturally an organized person, or is it just because I somehow figured out I have to do this and it just wasn't like conscious? You know, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it totally makes sense. And I think too, like the household that you were raised in, like how your parents were, has a huge impact. So yeah, you know, the whole entire discussion of like nature versus nurture, I think comes into play. And also too, it's expected more of girls to be organized and studious. So that plays into like the bias as well. But I don't know. That's a really good question. Like, did you just learn early on how to cope, or did you learn from your parents? Or if that's just, again, that may be how your brain's wired, you know, needing that, you know, to feel safe or just to function day to day. So it's just, this is so fascinating. It feels so complex. Yes.
How do I want to say it? I'm not even sure how to phrase this question either, but advocating for Bayley and school systems, things like that. I don't know if that's something you were planning on discussing or.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on it. So I think that my perspective had to change. I mean, I guess like the whole entire journey is fluid. Bayley's journey is not my journey, but the journey of being a caretaker, you know, for a child who is different, you know, that has changed and shifted a lot. So the biggest change was my perspective as far as viewing like disabled individuals. I had a lot of unknown like bias, and learning a lot of that came from when I worked in the school system, or even some of my college classes that I've taken, you know, in special education. There is this thought and idea that if you do have a disability, you should overcome it. You should rise above, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Or there's also this, they're super extra special and like celebrate them, which makes them untouchable, which is not the case. Or swing to the opposite side of like, these individuals are incompetent because they don't act like me. They don't sound like me. They're incompetent. So, you know, a lot of that is just a bias that I had, and it kind of just went different ways. And I had to really adjust my lens. And so things that I did in the school system, or things that I would say in the school system while working, you know, I now understand they were not helpful. And sometimes harmful, you know, just to the neurodiversity community movement and things like that. So my language has shifted, I would probably say the most, you know, how I refer to people. But just being on the opposite side of the table, as a parent, you just see how much our world and community, that they don't support people who are different. And that was really tough, because even when I worked in the school system, I felt like I worked with the best of the best. And coming to the fact that public education, and this is not a bash for public education, but it's an institution, you know, we push out cookie cutters, you know, children. It's not developmentally appropriate with what they expect of kids. And so realizing that, oh, what's this going to look like for Bayley, was interesting. It's still interesting, because not only am I advocating for her, I also find myself advocating for change in a system that is unwilling to change. And so that is that is hard, but I had to make a shift from, what I thought was okay to say and do, to realizing like, no, that doesn't really help out people, celebrating them, saying they're different or they're not animals or toys or anything like that. Like they're a human being. Mm-hmm. And even now, like I still find myself sometimes like, I'm just constantly self-reflecting because at some point, the advocating that I'm doing for Bayley, it's going to switch to her. Like, and so my husband and I are just very aware of things that we say and do because we don't ever want her to, overhear us in a moment of frustration of being a parent, mm-hmm. With an independent 4-year-old. It can come across as that we're frustrated with her. And so we're just very conscious of what we say and do around her. And we're pretty loud about how other people interact with her and approach her and stuff like that. Because it's already a tough place. Mm-hmm. And I know that we can't, shield her from everything, but the people that work with her every single day at school, we do have an expectation for them. And again, she's been so blessed with amazing teachers. The principals at her school are awesome. So, but just because they're awesome, we still advocate not only for her, but just change in the system. Mm-hmm. Because not every mom feels, I don't even want to say that I'm confident, but I have no problem ruffling feathers.
That's one thing I very much appreciate about you.
Yeah, I have no problem of like, asking why, or could you repeat that? Or what do you mean by that? Because that comes back from my experience in education, just knowing how things should be done and how things, aren't done. So, but yeah, every mom's not like me. And I think that's where a shift needs to happen too, is within systems and communities and schools, advocating more for the kids. And that doesn't always happen. So,
yeah. So one question that I had kind of come up as you were just describing this, it almost, to me, like the picture that came to mind was like you working so hard to start to educate yourself and to try to, like you said, you had to do so much change, like Bayley didn't need to change, all of that. And you're focusing on what you can actually control. And then I almost see this image of like pushing a boulder up a hill, and the hill is like the society, like, and all of the constructs and all of the things that still need to shift to make those things easier for caretakers.
Yes.
But with that being said, what gives you hope? Like, are there things that you're reading about or seeing firsthand or whatever that like gives you hope about things shifting in the right direction? Maybe the answer is no.
It's okay if the answer is no. I mean, we don't want that, but
well, because you see a lot, and again, that's another question. Like, you're probably like, dang, this girl really is ignorant. Like, why would you even ask?
No, it's not you being ignorant. So what's the saying? Your reality is your perspective. Is that right? That your perspective is reality, whatever.
Oh, sure. That makes sense. Yeah.
So again, Bayley has amazing supports in place. And I would say that it is tough as a caretaker to do the mental work. And with education and teachers, when they're in college, they're not learning about neurodiversity. they get like disability of the day, basically. So one day they talk about Down syndrome, one day they talk about autism, and all of that language and information is very outdated. Like my husband, he teaches high school English, and he saw a copy of one IEP, an individualized education plan. And his teacher said, "Oh, you'll hardly ever see these." That's not reality. He's pulled and asked to be in IEP meetings, and he's not really educated, on how to do this. So,
Right.
I would say that my hope is found in these amazing people that Bayley has on her team. It's like every year there's that change and transition, but she's still some way, somehow being supported by these great individuals. So that gives me a lot of hope. I would say that it's so tough. I'm just torn because I don't want to be like negative Nancy or anything.
Oh my gosh. No,
But
that's fine. And here's the thing. We want to, reality, bring us back to reality.
Yeah. The reality is there's bureaucracy. There's so much red tape. There's laws that are in place that do not support, disabled individuals. And so I think as I've been navigating things with Bayley, because she's been getting older, I'm learning more. And what I'm learning is not great. So like an example, here in North Carolina where I live, there's an innovation waiver. Most states have a similar program. And so essentially it's when kids hit a certain age, this age looks different for almost every single state. Their medical needs, their insurance, all of that is taken care of, by the state or whatever program. So the wait list in North Carolina is 10 to 15 years. So financially, Bayley will not be getting any support until she gets on that list. And the wait list is 10 to 15 years from doing multiple hours, multiple days of paperwork, trying to get in touch with someone. So like I had a friend whose child she thought was on the wait list, and something came up where I think one of their teachers said like, "Hey, have you contacted this program? I think there's a resource, yada, yada, yada." So my friend reached out, and through talking to that person, they found out that her child was never put on the wait list. And so 3 years went by of her thinking that her kid was on this wait list, and reality was they weren't. 3 years is a huge chunk of time on a 10 to 15 year wait list. So, I think it's like the bigger picture, the bureaucracy, the red tape that makes me not hopeful. Just because we keep finding these people in our lives and Bayley's lives that do want to learn, are so supportive and understanding, but we still have barriers. There's with like for North Carolina with that wait list, there's another program where when she would be an adult, she could have resources for her. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm reading up on it. But then I find out that she would be unable to have a full-time job. She would not be able to have any property in her name. So she couldn't even have a car in her name, a house in her name. And so that's very much like, well, what do you want for these individuals? Not to have a meaningful, purposeful life. It's like, let me support you. I'm doing air quotes, support you, but without a purpose or a meaningful life. Well, if they're not getting that support as far as like finances and, medical support, then their life is even harder. So those types of things are what's probably the most frustrating as a caretaker. And then also to individuals,
Yeah.
So I don't think I answered your question.
No, you did. You
Yeah,
absolutely, you absolutely did. And sharing that really your hope comes from the people who are really like boots on the ground, working directly with the neurodivergent community and all of that kind of stuff. No, I think that was a perfect answer. And I think that was probably the better question would have been to say what gives you hope and what still gives you a lot of frustration.
Yes,
because
lot of frustration. Yeah.
And that goes with so many different things in our society. It's like, okay, I can see here's the good, but then here's like we still have a long way to go. So no, so I think you did a perfect job of answering that for sure. Lisa,
because we don't know. And so the only way is to educate people,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sure that is a very, very, very slow process.
And frustrating in itself as well. I mean, that's got to be, and it's somebody who, isn't a caretaker or isn't, dealing with autism myself or anything like that. It can feel, I can understand that perspective of like, oh my gosh, like I'm worried I'll say the wrong thing, or I'm worried people can get caught up in that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that goes with, I think, so many different other issues that are also very, very important. But I think it's more, we have to kind of get over ourselves is where I'm trying to go with this point. And to be willing to mess up, say, I'm sorry, or ask questions or whatever the case may be, so that we can, start to all sort of raise our awareness of this,
Right. In other words, not avoid the issue because we're afraid of messing up. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. And I think it's hard for individuals to admit that they were wrong or, and I mean, I mess up, I say things, or I look back on Bayley's journey and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done this differently. But I think just being, like you said, like realizing that you may not be part of a community, but listening to that community and understanding like, you're going to say something wrong, like it's fine. I think it's all about intention, I think intention is a huge thing.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And remembering like, how does she say that? I'm trying to think of this quote. It's Brene Brown, and I know everybody's going to roll their eyes, but she says, I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right, or something like that.
Yeah. I like that.
So, like that's putting the focus back too much on ourselves when we're like, well, I don't want to mess up. I have to be perfect. I have to get it all right or whatever. And it's like, taking down those defenses when somebody might call you out. Somebody might be like, actually, no, and to humble yourself and realize like, okay, I'm not as well-versed in this as this other person or whatever the case may be. So
humility, that's a big thing.
Absolutely. Lisa, did you have anything else before I kind of move on to our last?
I know you have a very important question.
And I'll wrap it up. This is, we're asking all of our guests this question in this series.
Yeah.
I've already kind of prepped you on a little bit. It'll be very simple. But yeah. And then of course, if there's anything else that you want to add in addition after this is fine. I want to make sure that I get a chance to ask this, but just if there's a lesson that you've learned or a takeaway that feels important to you as you've navigated some of these different shifts that we've just discussed, like, would you say, yeah, here's something that's like been a big takeaway for me, or here's my cat. Oh my gosh.
So many big ones.
Go for it.
I think so. I'm always trying to like keep myself in check and self-reflect. And I do find myself when I'm like getting frustrated or a little irritated about a situation, may not be as understanding. Have y'all talked about the Enneagram on your show?
Yes, girl.
So
A timer 10.
I'm a 4, probably more specifically a French Revolution 4. So I want justice right now. So I have learned that I need to give people grace. I'm so much like, let's go, let's do this. And then when people aren't at my level, I'm like, why? Like, you just need to accept it. You need to learn, you need to move on. And so then I'm like, well, that's almost counteractive of what I'm trying to promote with Bayley. Like, right. I have found myself needing to slow down and gain other people's perspectives when they are resistant to change. And that's been hard for me because I'm just like, you need to change. Like, this is what the autistic community is saying, be quiet, change your ways and move on. And so just trying to find that balance, because I think sometimes you can give too much grace, and things become compliant. And so, just trying to find that balance, I think in general is hard, but for me and my personality, it's really, 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 really hard. So that's probably been my biggest takeaway is, asking more questions, gain people's perspectives before jumping to conclusions. Mm-hmm. And through that process, you can hold people accountable. So I'm learning how to do things differently.
Yeah.
So
I think that is hugely important. And that I think could cover so many different topics, and not like, this is like in life, that is a great lesson for any of us to be able to try to find that balance. Cause you're exactly right. And it is one of those spectrums again, where sometimes people, yes, you want to give people grace, but at the same time, like, do you really want to just let them keep perpetuating like false information or whatever the case may be? Like, it's finding that balance, as you said. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And like, I have to remind myself that one term I didn't even talk about was ableism. I don't know if y'all have heard that word. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, the viewpoint that if you are disabled, it's wrong. And, systems are set up in place to be ableist. So understanding that like ableism just didn't happen overnight. Our systems weren't just built in a day to not benefit the disabled community. Like, just remembering that, unfortunately, it's taken us a long time to do all of these terrible things, and harmful things, that it's going to take time for change to happen. Again, finding that balance of knowing when to keep pushing. But I have to remind myself that like, things are not going to change overnight.
Absolutely. That's huge. Thank you for sharing that.
But it has been a joy to actually meet you, Tiffany.
I know. We're so grateful that you agreed on. And I think, people are going to definitely take a lot from this conversation.
Yeah, this is a big deal. We really appreciate your openness and your willingness to just be super honest, even if you weren't feeling like it was maybe the right thing to do.
Sometimes I'm transparent to a fault. So,
I feel that. No, it's all good. We very much appreciate it. I think it's definitely needed, especially in this conversation. Or any final words or anything else you want to leave us with?
So y'all upload to YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe could I give you some links?
Yes.
In the description for people, just to kind of maybe learn more about, autism or neurodiversity, things like that.
Absolutely.
That's the only thing.
Resources would be amazing.
Yes, we'll put them in the show notes for both the podcast and for YouTube. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Bye.
Hey, let's get it.
Thanks for hanging with us through today's tangents. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again soon, but meanwhile, you can follow along with us on Instagram at No Tangents. We would love it if you would subscribe and maybe even consider leaving us a review, a highly complimentary one.
Ain't no topic, keep it going, no, don't stop it. Don't get the picture, then we crap it. With no emotion, what's the logic? We just lost in our thoughts.